In this unit, we will explore the links between science, technology, and ethics. Now, science and technology are different. Science tries to understand the world. It is, for example, what a physicist does when they explain how the planets move around the sun. And technology tries to invent objects, artifacts, machines that help us to improve our quality of life. That's, for example, what an engineer does when they invent a new car or a new plane. But today, science and technology are linked together. For example, if we are trying to combat a virus, we need to know how the virus works. That's what science does. But we also need to create medicines to combat it, and that's a technological thing. So, science and technology are connected, and some people talk about them together, calling them technoscience. Now, are technoscientific developments good or bad? If you think about how the world has changed in the last years, you will be aware that a lot of things are different now. Imagine how the world must have looked like when your grandparents were small. In those days, probably there were no washing machines, so people had to wash their clothes going to the river. Maybe there were no antibiotics, so if you had an infection, it was hard to combat. And of course, there were no computers, there were no mobile phones, there was no internet. It's hard to imagine a world like that, isn't it? This means that our world is quite different. But this doesn't mean that technology and science are always good and positive. Science and technology also have a dark side. Think about nuclear energy. Nuclear energy can be great if it can produce electricity, but it can be very harmful when it is used to create bombs that can kill millions of people. So how can we evaluate if a certain technoscientific development is positive or negative? Of course, we should take into account how useful this invention is, but that's not all. We should also take into account if it contributes to improve people's health and well-being, and we should also consider how it affects the environment. So it's a tricky thing to decide when a certain invention is positive or negative. Nevertheless, this also implies that not everything should be permitted in scientific and technological research. We must establish limits, legal limits and moral limits to what scientists and engineers can do. Legal limits refer to the law. We must establish a legislation that determines what is permitted and what not, and we must punish people that violate those limits. But there are also ethical, moral limits, because some things are incorrect, are unethical, because they harm other people and they harm the environment. And we should always take that into account as well. Now, one of the most interesting problems that have to do with ethics related with technology is techno-dependency. This is especially connected with the internet and the new technologies. Some people get addicted to them. And that can also happen if you use them every day, at all times, and without checking what kinds of content you're visiting in the internet. The internet is a wonderful source of information, but it is also full of dangers. I'm sure that you're aware of some of them. In the internet you can find websites with inappropriate content, with violent, with sexual content, with fake news, with misinformation, with gambling. So you should be careful with that. The internet can also be used to practice what is called as cyberbullying, that is, bullying another person using the internet. And it is also a problem when you use it to check information but you don't take care of your own privacy. You must always take care with that and not give your personal data to anybody. So how can we use the internet safely? Now let me give you a piece of advice. First of all, it is wise and reasonable if you set a limit to the time you spend using the internet. It is also interesting that your parents know what you're doing. So it's good if you have a computer that is open to everyone and that your parents can see while you access the internet, so they can keep track of what contents you're checking and you're visiting. You must be very careful in the internet and you must maintain your privacy. So being very aware of the importance of your personal data, not giving personal information to the first person that asks for your data in the internet. You should avoid dangerous places with inappropriate content. And especially, you should never do in the internet what you would never do in the real world. We sometimes think the internet is different, but everything in the internet is recorded forever, so you should be careful with what you say and what you do there in the internet. Finally, if you have any doubt or you have any problem with that, feel free to talk to your parents or your teachers to ask for their advice or for their help if you need it.